The orientation hall of the Galactic Military Academy buzzed with nervous energy as 317 cadets from 42 different species shuffled into their assigned seats. Commander Tom Malley, a grizzled Centaurian with scars crisscrossing his blue-scaled face, stood at the podium with the kind of expression that suggested he had personally wrestled death and won, twice. "Settle down, you sorry excuses for future officers." Malley's voice boomed across the amphitheater, causing several of the more delicate species to visibly flinch. The Gossarian twins in row 3 actually hugged each other for comfort. "Today we discuss survival, not the fun kind where you get to show off your tactical brilliance, but the kind where you might actually keep breathing for another solar cycle." Cadet Zupfik, a lanky Vraxian with tentacles for arms, leaned forward eagerly. His species prided themselves on being apex hunters of their homeworld, so naturally he assumed this would be easy material. How wrong he was about to be. "Now pay attention, because I'm only going to say this once, and if you miss it, well, let us just say your next of kin will receive a very small box with your remains." Malley continued, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the room. "There exists in this galaxy a species so dangerous, so utterly terrifying, that even mentioning their young in polite society is considered poor taste." The crystalloid cadet in the back row, whose entire body was made of living mineral, actually began to dim with fear. This was impressive, considering crystalloids literally fed on cosmic radiation, and were generally afraid of nothing. "Sir, are you referring to the Shadowborn Collective?" asked Cadet Morgothix, a 6-armed hegemony warrior whose homeworld was famous for producing the galaxy's most feared assassins. Malley's laugh was the kind of sound that suggested someone had just asked if a supernova was warm. "Oh, sweet naive child. The Shadowborn? They are like harmless pets compared to what I am about to describe." He clicked a button, and the holographic image appeared above the podium. It showed what appeared to be a small, furry creature with large eyes and tiny paws. The entire auditorium erupted into screams. Cadet Blickstar, whose species had conquered 17 star systems through sheer aggression, actually fainted and had to be caught by his neighbor. The Gossarian twins were now sobbing openly, their crystalline tears making tiny pinging sounds as they hit the floor. "Behold," Malley announced with dramatic flair, "the Apex Cube, the most dangerous creature in the known universe. One look at these innocent-appearing death machines has been known to cause complete psychological breakdowns in trained military personnel. Their very presence can induce what we call the protector syndrome, an overwhelming irrational need to provide care and protection that has led to the downfall of entire civilizations." In the middle of the chaos, one figure sat perfectly still. Cadet Amy Kowalski, the lone human representative in this year's class, looked around with genuine confusion written across her face. Her brown hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, and her green eyes held the expression of someone trying to solve a particularly puzzling math problem. "The toxins they release through their skin contact can cause immediate addiction," Malley continued, oblivious to Amy's perplexed state. "Victims report an uncontrollable urge to make high-pitched vocalizations, often accompanied by baby talk and an inexplicable desire to provide food and shelter. The end stages involve complete abandonment of rational thought and priority systems." Cadet Thorvak, whose people were descended from literal space Vikings, raised a shaking hand. "Commander, how does one avoid falling victim to these monsters?" "Simple," Malley replied grimly. You run fast, you run far, and you never ever look back. And if you encounter their nesting sites, you evacuate the entire sector and call in orbital bombardment. It is the only way to be sure." Amy's hand slowly raised into the air. The gesture was so unexpected that the panic murmuring in the room gradually died down as everyone turned to stare at her. "Yes, Cadet Kowalski," Malley acknowledged, probably expecting a question about evacuation protocols or military-grade protective equipment. Sir?" Amy's voice was soft, genuinely puzzled. "Are you talking about those little fuzzy things with the big eyes and the tiny pink noses? The ones that make that weird rumbling sound when you pet their bellies?" The silence that followed was so complete that you could have heard a pin drop in the vacuum of space. Marley's face went through several interesting color changes, settling on a shade of pale green that suggested either illness or complete existential crisis. "Cadet Kowalski," he said very slowly, very carefully, "please tell me you have never encountered an apex cube in person." Amy's response would haunt Marley's dreams for years to come. "Oh, you mean the ones in my room?" 3 weeks after Commander Marley's infamous orientation speech, Inspection Day descended upon the Galactic Military Academy like a bureaucratic plague. Admiral Veshy, a distinguished Corellian, whose purple skin bore the ceremonial tattoos of someone who had survived 17 military campaigns, led the inspection team with the kind of precision that made junior officers break out in stress-induced rashes. "Remember, cadets," announced Quartermaster Moran over the intercom system, his nasally voice echoing through every corridor, "today's inspection will determine your fitness for continued service. Any violations of Academy regulations will result in immediate disciplinary action, possible expulsion, and in extreme cases, notification of your home governments for potential exile." The inspection team moved through the dormitory levels with methodical efficiency. Admiral Vashi walked alongside Admiral Drawhorn, a massive Thurconian whose forearms were currently folded behind his back in perfect military posture. Behind them trailed a collection of junior officers, medical personnel, and what appeared to be a legal advisor, Judge Quintara, whose insectoid features made her expressions impossible to read but whose reputation for finding loopholes in intergalactic law was legendary. As they progressed through each floor, word of their approach spread like wildfire among the cadets. Whispered conversations followed in their wake, growing more frantic as they climbed higher toward the human quarters. "Did you hear what Kowalski said during orientation?" hissed Cadet Zefik to his roommate, a nervous Altarian whose scales were currently shifting from blue to bright yellow with anxiety. "She claimed to have those things in her room." "Impossible," the Altarian replied, though his voice shook with uncertainty. "The Academy would never allow such dangerous creatures on the premises. The insurance alone would bankrupt 3 solar systems." Cadet Blickstar, who had finally recovered from his fainting episode 3 weeks prior, joined their hushed discussion. "But what if she is telling the truth? What if the humans do not understand what they are dealing with? We could all be in mortal danger." Meanwhile, 2 floors below, the inspection team was wrapping up their review of the Zentarian cadets' quarters. Everything was regulation perfect, as expected from a warrior species that treated military precision like a religious calling. "Excellent work, cadets," Admiral Veshy noted, making marks on his electronic clipboard. "Your quarters meet all standards for cleanliness, organization, and adherence to safety protocols." Admiral Drawhorn nodded approvingly with all 4 of his heads. "Indeed. Now shall we proceed to the human quarters? I believe we have only one representative this year." Judge Quintara's compound eyes focused on her own tablet. According to the records, Cadet Amy Kowalski, age 19 standard years from the 3rd planet in the Sol system, clean disciplinary record, though there is an interesting notation here about an unusual pet registration request that was apparently approved. The medical officer, a small Pixarian, whose entire body resembled a walking mushroom, looked up from his scanner readings. "Pet registration? What kind of pet?" The documentation simply states, "Domestic companions, species classification pending," Quintara read aloud. "Signed off by," she paused, her mandibles clicking in confusion. "This cannot be right. It says it was approved by Commander Marley himself." Admiral Vashi stopped walking so abruptly that the entire inspection team nearly crashed into him. Marley approved a pet registration. The same Marley who once banned decorative plants because he considered them a security risk. As they reached the human quarters level, the tension among the gathered cadets was palpable. Students lined the corridors, supposedly cleaning or organizing their gear, but obviously waiting to see what would happen. The Gossarian twins were hiding behind a supply cart, their crystalline forms vibrating with nervous energy. "Stand aside, cadets," Admiral Drawhorn commanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had personally negotiated 3 interstellar peace treaties. The students scrambled to clear a path, their whispered predictions growing more dire by the moment. 10 credits says she gets expelled, muttered Cadet Thorvak. 20 says they evacuate the entire level, countered another voice. 50 says Admiral Vashi has a complete nervous breakdown, added Cadet Morgathex, whose species' natural pessimism was showing. They approached Amy's door, room 8137B. Admiral Vashi raised his hand to knock, then hesitated. Perhaps we should have brought additional security personnel. For a routine inspection? Judge Quintara asked, though her voice carried a note of uncertainty that suggested she was reconsidering that assessment. The human cadets are generally considered harmless, the medical officer added helpfully, though their psychological profiles do indicate an unusual tolerance for dangerous situations that other species find disturbing. Admiral Vashi knocked twice. Cadet Kowalski, this is Admiral Vashi conducting your scheduled quarters inspection. Coming came a cheerful voice from within, followed by what sounded like rustling and a series of soft, chittering noises that made every alien in the inspection team freeze with terror. The door slid open, revealing Amy Kowalski in her regulation uniform, smiling brightly at the assembled officials. Good morning, Admirals. Perfect timing. They just woke up from their nap. They? Admiral Drahorn repeated weakly, all four of his heads turning pale. Amy stepped aside to allow them entry, and what the inspection team saw defied every survival instinct they possessed. There, scattered around the room like living, breathing nightmares, were 6 apex cubs. They were even more terrifying in person than the holographic images had suggested, small, fuzzy creatures with disproportionately large eyes, tiny pink noses, and paws so small they looked like they had been designed by someone with a particularly twisted sense of humor. Admiral Vashi made a sound that was somewhere between a whimper and a dying space whale. Admiral Drahorn, despite his impressive size and military bearing, immediately backed against the wall, all four of his arms pressed flat against his chest in a defensive posture. Judge Quintara's legal training kicked in, and she began frantically scrolling through her tablet. There has to be a regulation about this. There has to be something in the manual about unauthorized possession of Galaxy-class predators. The medical officer's scanner began beeping frantically, detecting elevated stress hormones from every alien present. Fascinating, he whispered, apparently having some sort of academic breakdown. The readings are off the charts. This level of psychological impact should be impossible from such small creatures. Meanwhile, Amy seemed completely oblivious to the crisis she had caused. She walked over to one of the cubs, a particularly small one with grey and white fur, and scooped it up in her hands. The creature immediately began making a soft, rhythmic rumbling sound. This little guy is Whiskers, she announced proudly, holding the cub up for everyone to see. He is the troublemaker of the group. Yesterday he figured out how to open the food dispenser and ate everyone else's portions. Admiral Vashi's knees gave out, and he had to grab the doorframe for support. Dear Cosmic Forces, he whispered. She is holding it. She is actually making physical contact with the apex predator, and it is purring at her. Amy continued to hold Whiskers, completely unaware that 3 of the galaxy's most decorated military officers were having simultaneous psychological episodes in her doorway. The small grey and white creature stretched in her hands, extending tiny claws that made Admiral Vashi whimper audibly. Oh, do not worry about the claws, Amy said cheerfully, noticing the Admiral's distress. They only use them for climbing and playing. Watch this. She gently placed Whiskers on her shoulder, where he immediately began kneading her uniform with his paws, the purring sound growing louder. Admiral Drahorn, still pressed against the wall with all 4 arms protecting his vital organs, managed to speak in a voice that was only slightly higher pitched than usual. Cadet Kowalski, we need you to explain, very slowly and very carefully, how you came to possess these creatures of unimaginable terror. Amy blinked in confusion, glancing around at the other 5 cubs who were now beginning to stir from their naps. A particularly fluffy orange one opened its eyes and let out a small mewing sound that caused Judge Quintara to drop her tablet. Well, it is kind of a funny story, actually, Amy began, settling cross-legged on her bed while Whiskers repositioned himself in her lap. I was on shore leave about a month ago, visiting this little trading station near the Kepler Nebula. You know the one, Morrison's Outpost. They have that great sandwich shop on level 7. The medical officer, who had been frantically scanning the cubs with his equipment, looked up with wide eyes. You encountered them at a civilian trading station? How is that possible? The entire sector should have been evacuated. Oh, that. Amy waved dismissively, causing Whiskers to chirp in protest at the sudden movement. The station manager, this really nice Belteran guy named Grix, mentioned something about pest control issues in the lower cargo holds. Apparently these little guys had somehow gotten into the ventilation systems and were causing all sorts of problems. Admiral Vashi, who had managed to remain standing by sheer force of will, stared at her in horror. Problems? What kind of problems? Well, according to Grix, the entire maintenance crew had stopped working, Amy explained, scratching behind Whisker's ears. The purring intensified, causing Admiral Drahorn to make a small choking sound. They kept getting distracted by these little fuzzy shapes, darting through the air ducts. Some of the crew members were spending their entire shifts just sitting there, making weird cooing noises, and trying to lure them out with food scraps. Judge Quintara had retrieved her tablet and was frantically scrolling through legal databases. This is classic apex predator behavior, she muttered. Complete psychological dominance through weaponized cuteness. The victims become completely unable to perform their duties. Right, Amy continued, oblivious to the legal implications being discussed around her. So Grix was really worried about productivity, and he asked if I could help with the pest problem. I figured, how hard could it be to catch a few small animals? So I went down to the cargo holds with some basic trapping equipment, and well, she paused in her story as another cub, this one black with white spots, stretched and wandered over to investigate the strangers in the room. It approached Admiral Drahorn's feet and began sniffing curiously at his boots. Admiral Drahorn looked down at the creature with the expression of a man watching his own death approach in slow motion. It examining me. Is this normal behavior before an attack? Attack? Amy laughed, a sound that somehow made the situation even more surreal. Mittens would not hurt anyone. She is probably just curious about your scent. She does that with everyone new. The medical officer's scanner was now emitting a continuous stream of alarmed beeps. Cadet, please continue your explanation. How exactly did you solve the pest problem? Amy's face lit up with the memory. Oh, that was the easy part. I just sat down in the cargo bay and waited. Within about 10 minutes they all came out to investigate. I guess humans smell interesting to them or something. Anyway, they just walked right up to me, and when I reached out to pet one of them, it started making this amazing rumbling sound. She demonstrated by stroking Whiskers again, producing the purring that had become the soundtrack to everyone's existential crisis. Then what happened? Judge Quintora asked, though her voice suggested she was not sure she wanted to know the answer. Well, I tried to take them back to Grix so he could relocate them somewhere more appropriate, Amy continued. But when I picked them up to carry them, they seemed really upset about being separated from me. And honestly, Grix looked like he was about to have some kind of medical episode when he saw them. He kept backing away and muttering about psychological warfare and call the authorities. Admiral Vashi had given up any pretense of military bearing and was now sitting on the floor, his back against the wall. So you adopted them? Not exactly, Amy said. I mean, I tried to find them proper homes. I posted notices on the station's community board, sent messages to several wildlife rescue organizations, even contacted the local zoo. But everyone who responded had the same weird reaction. They would take one look at the pictures I sent, and then immediately cancel our meetings. It was really strange. Judge Quintara looked up from her tablet with an expression of dawning comprehension. Cadet, did anyone ever explain to you what these creatures actually are? Well, Grix kept calling them those cursed beasts, and demons of psychological manipulation, Amy replied thoughtfully. But I figured that was just because they were causing problems with his staff. He had a tendency toward dramatic language anyway. Oh, and Commander Marley mentioned something about apex predators during orientation, but I assumed he was talking about something completely different. At the mention of Marley's name, all three senior officers exchanged glances that conveyed volumes of unspoken communication. It was Admiral Drahorn who finally spoke, his voice carefully controlled despite the fact that Mittens had now decided to investigate his other boot. Cadet Kowalski, these creatures you have so casually adopted are considered the most psychologically dangerous species in known space. They are called apex cubs, specifically because their cuteness represents the apex of evolutionary warfare. They have been responsible for the complete breakdown of military discipline on dozens of worlds. Amy looked down at Whiskers, who chose that moment to roll over in her lap and expose his fuzzy belly. Really? But they are so harmless. Look, Whiskers is asking for belly rubs. The medical officer made a strangled noise as his scanner registered what could only be described as catastrophic stress readings from every non-human in the room. This is unprecedented. A human showing complete immunity to apex predator psychological manipulation. The scientific implications alone. Judge Quintara had found something in her research that made her compound eyes widen with alarm. According to Interstellar Wildlife Protection Protocol 84-7 Alpha, possession of apex cubs requires special licensing, psychological evaluation, and approval from no fewer than 3 separate military oversight committees. Oh, Amy said, looking genuinely concerned for the first time. Am I in trouble? Because I did try to register them properly. I filled out all the forms Commander Marley gave me, and he signed off on everything. He said something about humans being weird enough to handle unusual pets. Admiral Vashi closed his eyes and took several deep breaths. Marley signed off on your pet registration. Marley, who once confiscated a cadet's stuffed animal because he considered it a comfort item that compromised military readiness. He seemed really enthusiastic about it, actually, Amy added helpfully. He kept muttering something about poetic justice and let them deal with their own consequences. I was not sure what he meant, but he was laughing when he approved the forms, so I figured it was good news. Admiral Drahorn had apparently decided that the situation could not get any worse, and was now cautiously extending one finger toward Mittens, who had settled down next to his foot. The moment his skin made contact with her fur, his entire expression changed to one of wonder and terror combined. Oh no, he whispered. I can feel it happening. The urge to protect, the need to provide food and shelter. This is how civilizations fall. Within 2 hours of the inspection incident, an emergency council meeting was convened in the Academy's highest security conference room. General Kraftnog, an imposing Valdorian, whose crystalline exoskeleton reflected the room's lighting in ominous patterns, sat at the head of a table surrounded by the most bewildered collection of military brass in galactic history. Let me understand this correctly. General Kraftnog began, his voice carrying the kind of authority that had once ended 3 separate wars through sheer intimidation. We have a human cadet who has somehow domesticated 6 apex cubs, treats them like harmless pets, and shows complete immunity to their psychological warfare capabilities. Admiral Vashi, who had managed to regain some of his composure after being sedated by the medical team, nodded grimly. That is correct, sir. She was petting them. Actually petting them, and they were responding positively. The purring alone should have caused complete cognitive shutdown, added Admiral Drahorn, who was still twitching slightly from his encounter with Mittens. But she seemed to find it soothing. I've never seen anything like it in 40 years of military service. Judge Quintara cleared her throat, her mandibles clicking nervously. Sir, there is another complication. According to the documentation, Commander Marley not only approved her pet registration, but did so with what appears to be deliberate intent. His signature is accompanied by a note that reads, and I quote, "If humans want to keep galactic nightmares as pets, who are we to stop natural selection in action?" The silence that followed was so profound that it seemed to have its own gravitational pull. Marley, General Kraftnog said slowly, approved this as a practical joke. It appears so, sir. Quartermaster Moran confirmed, consulting his tablet. However, the approval is legally binding under Academy Regulation 47B, which states that properly filed pet registrations cannot be revoked without just cause. Just cause. General Kraftnog's voice rose several octaves. They are apex predators. Yes, sir, but technically speaking, they have shown no aggressive behavior toward anyone, Judge Quintara pointed out. In fact, according to the medical officer's report, their presence seems to have a calming effect on the human cadet. Her stress levels are actually below normal academy baseline. At that moment there was a polite knock on the conference room door. "Come in," General Krafnog called, expecting another panicked report from the academy staff. Instead, Amy Kowalski entered, carrying what appeared to be a list written on actual paper. She snapped to attention, with perfect military precision, though the effect was somewhat undermined by the small orange cube peeking out of her uniform pocket. "Sir, Cadet Kowalski reporting as requested," she announced. "I was told you wanted to discuss my pet situation." Every alien in the room instinctively leaned away from her, except for General Krafnog, who seemed fascinated despite himself. "Cadet, we need to address the irregularities in your living arrangements." "Oh, good," Amy said brightly, pulling out her list. "I was hoping we could talk about that. I have been doing some research, and I think my little guys need some additional supplies to be properly comfortable. Nothing too fancy, just some basic necessities." Admiral Vashi made a small whimpering sound. "Necessities? Well, for starters, they really need a proper climbing structure," Amy explained, consulting her notes. "Right now they're using my bookshelf, but I think they would prefer something specifically designed for their needs. Also, their current food dispenser is too big for them. They keep falling into it when they try to eat." Judge Quintara was frantically taking notes. "Climbing structures, food modifications. What else? Oh, and toys?" Amy continued enthusiastically. "They love anything that makes noise or moves around. I have been using rolled-up socks and rubber bands, but I think they deserve something better. Maybe some of those interactive puzzle feeders I saw in the Academy Pet Supply catalog." General Krafnog stared at her in amazement. "Cadet, you do realize that these creatures are considered the most dangerous psychological weapons in known space?" Amy looked confused. "Sir, I think there might be some kind of misunderstanding. These are just cats." The word hit the room like a photon torpedo. "Cats?" Admiral Drahorn repeated weakly. "Yes, sir. Felis catus. Domestic house cats from Earth," Amy explained patiently. "I mean, I know they can be a bit mischievous, but dangerous. They spend most of their time sleeping and playing with string." Quartermaster Maran looked up from his tablet with an expression of dawning horror. Someone cross-referenced the Galactic Database entry for apex cubs with Earth designation Felis catus. The room fell silent except for the soft clicking of keyboard inputs. Then Judge Quintara's voice cut through the quiet like a blade. Oh no. The database entries match. The creatures that have terrified civilizations across 17 sectors are common household pets on Earth. General Krafnog put his head in his hands. "So you are telling me that humans voluntarily share their living spaces with what we consider psychological warfare agents?" "Well, yes, sir," Amy replied. "Though most people just call it having a cat. Some families have several. My neighbor back home had 12. The collective gasp from the assembled officers could probably have been heard from orbit. 6 months later, the Galactic Military Academy had implemented new policies regarding human cultural sensitivity training and species-specific threat assessment protocols. Commander Mali was reassigned to a remote observation post, where his sense of humor could do less damage to interstellar relations. Amy Kowalski graduated with honors, specializing in cross-species psychological resilience, a field that had been created specifically for her. Her cats, now officially recognized as therapy animals rather than apex predators, became the unofficial mascots of the Academy. And somewhere in the vast bureaucracy of galactic government, a file was quietly updated to reflect that Earth cats were reclassified from galaxy-class threat to adorable companion species, humans only. Amy never did understand why everyone made such a big deal about it.